Okay, folks, we'll make a start. Good morning, and thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Ethan Lahry. I am a communications and training executive with Outscape, and yeah, I'm absolutely delighted that everyone could join us for our training webinar on the Outdoors for Everyone, applying accessibility guidance to Northern Ireland. Um, this is a really exciting webinar today. I think it's probably reflected by the fact that we have until 30 seconds ago, still people signing up for it, which is a good indicator of the level of interest. And with nearly 90 people attending today, which is fantastic. And more actually who have asked for the recording afterwards. On that note, today is being recorded, so just some general housekeeping. If you're happy keeping yourselves on mute and your camera turned off, just during the conversations, and obviously if you'd like to contribute, feel free to turn it on at whenever you're speaking. I'd like to take a quick second to say thank you to Dira and Sport NI for their funding. This is our fourth training session, and without that funding, these wouldn't be possible. So we're really grateful to them today. The interest in terms of the level of scope of people who are on the call and who've signed up for today's training it's brilliant to see, with delegates from organisations like Brain Injury Matters to Macadam Design to Woodland Trust to councils, governmental bodies, and on and on. So it's great to see so many people from so many different backgrounds of the sector here. And I suppose we're just really keen that you come away today. We've got a fantastic panel who I will introduce very shortly. And I guess the goal is to make the most of that panel and use their knowledge in the time that we have here today. We are relatively limited, so if I at any point seem to be moving things on a little bit too quickly, I apologize. Well, it's just to make sure that we cover everything that we want to get covered, and there will be an opportunity for questions. Feel free to at any point type a question into the chat, or raise your hand in the chat, and we will come to you as quick as we can. A quick note that today's focus will be on accessibility guidance in Northern Ireland specifically. I'm conscious that we have delegates here from a range of bodies from the Republic of Ireland, like Fáilte Ireland and Ireland's Association for Adventure Tourism, and it's great to have you here. Hopefully you'll be able to contribute your own thoughts and experiences on the issues that we will be discussing. Kerry, if you want to move on to our next slide there. Super. So in a moment, I will at long last introduce you to our panel, who are our experts for today. And the plan is, in terms of our agenda, we're going to start with the inverted commas homework that everybody was set in the form of the Paths for All Outdoor Accessibility Guidance video from the ORN webinar. At that point, we'll bring our experts in and ask them a couple of questions around that guidance, and move on to a broader discussion on the document and how it relates to Northern Ireland, and sort of what all the people from different organisations here today can take from that. I imagine that will probably be quite a more thematic, broad issue or discussion of the issues, after which we'll then move on to the sort of more practical challenges that many of you face on the ground. And I really appreciate the number of people who have sent in suggestions for topics and issues that they're having in advance. It makes our job a lot easier. So thank you for those, and we'll cover as many of those as possible today. And then the plan is to finish off today's webinar with a quick look at accessibility and what we will be discussing in terms of accessibility in 15 years. But to start us off, I'm going to introduce you to our experts. We have Kevin O'Neill. Firstly, Kevin is the Chief Executive Officer of Disability Sport NI, Northern Ireland's main disability sports charity, working to improve the health and well-being of disabled people through sport and active recreation. Kevin has worked in the disability sports sector for almost 30 years now, and was instrumental in the formation of Disability Sport NI in 1998. Kevin's been responsible for a range of successful community and performance sport projects and initiatives focused on meeting the charity's mission to give disabled people an equal opportunity to live a full, active and healthy lifestyle through sport and active recreation. And this included the development of the Accessible Outdoor Places Design Guidelines in 2021, which we will likely touch on today. Also from Disability Sport NI, we have Aisling Irvine. Aisling has been a registered consultant member of the National Register of Access Consultants since 2008 and is a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects and Architects Registration Board, being professionally qualified in architecture from Queen's University of Belfast. Aisling set up her access consultancy practice in 2011, and she acts as an access consultant to Disability Sport NI. So it's fantastic in her broad knowledge in the field. In the call, this work includes the implementation of Disability Sport NI's Inclusive Sports Facility Accreditation Scheme and assisting in the development of Disability Sport NI's design and management guidelines, and that includes the Accessible Outdoor Places Design document, which I mentioned a moment ago. Pippa Campbell is joining us from the Mae Murray Foundation. Pippa is from the Mae Murray Foundation, as I say, and is responsible for the Inclusive Beach Project along the North Coast, working with beach operators to ensure the legacy of inclusive beaches. Alongside all the processes and administration required to maintain the project, she enjoys the events element on the beaches of fun days, sit-down surfing, and Santa on the beach. We also have Margaret Henry from the National Lottery Heritage Fund in Northern Ireland. Margaret is the head of engagement and has been with the Heritage Fund for almost 3 years and works to advise and support applicants and develop strategic partnerships across a range of stakeholders. Finally, and last but definitely not least, my colleagues from Outscape are joining us today. We have Fiona Millen, who is a place shaping principal. Fiona has worked for Outscape for over 10 years and has really extensive knowledge and experience in designing outdoor spaces and trails with a particular love for play. She delivered one of her flagship projects in Gosford Forest Park, recognised as Ireland's greatest adventure play trail, and is currently working with Roscommon County Council to design and build an inclusive playscape for Moat Park. And finally, Claire McLarnon. Claire is a place shaping principal in Outscape and has recently written a visitor experience focused design toolkit for inclusive trail networks in the Midlands of Ireland. Developed master plans for forest areas with close engagement with lived experience organisations, and developed a toolkit for changing places toilets in the outdoors. And in a previous role, Claire also worked with Sustrans, and she led their physical review and action plan for Northern Ireland's National Cycle Network as part of Sustrans' new vision for Paths for Everyone. I think it's important. I know that is quite a lot of detail, but I think it's very important. And some of the feedback we've had in the past is it's important to know who our speakers are and their different backgrounds and knowing what they can bring to the table. So I think everybody will agree that we are spoiled for choice here with our experts. So I'm going to kick us off with, as I say, we're going back to the Paths for All guidance that everybody has hopefully had the chance to watch, and specifically starting with a quote from Jane Stoneham from the Sensory Trust, which I thought was really powerful. Jane is the director of Accessible and Engaged Environments, and on the call, she just off the cuff sort of she made this quote, and I thought it was really, as I say, really powerful and a good place for us to start our conversation today. It was in the context of with the best will in the world, landowners and trail developers will make decisions based on the law of averages. And on that there, Jane said, but the problem is when we always design for an average, we keep leaving out the same people over and over again. So I'm going to bring in our experts to start us off with some discussion around this. I know Pippa have been having a little bit of trouble. Pippa, are you in the call? I know you're having some technical issues.
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Pippa. Thank you so much for joining us. Pippa, so I'm going to start off with that. The Mae Murray Foundation are obviously sort of widely regarded as experts in the field, and a lot of what that guidance has covered. Who are the people that we are leaving out in Northern Ireland when we do err on the side of that average?
I think a lot almost becoming the majority now. When you see the figures of who needs extra support to get out and about, it's moving into the majority rather than the average now. And I think the exclusion as an organisation, I know we started very much from the history of a granny with a disabled grandchild who was determined that she would be included in everything that she wanted to do. But I think our ethos sort of has gone broader than that to include anyone who's excluded for any reason. And I think if you look at it from that view, you're actually changing your point of view entirely from the barriers to starting from a much broader point. So I think we're leaving out an awful lot of people in our population, be that language, be that access, be that just lack of knowledge and confidence and how we get through. I mean, I heard the other day that along the North Coast, there's something like 50 nationalities living there now. But you only ever speak to English speaking people because people can't join in because they don't know how to join in. So I think that our membership reflects people who are excluded for a number of reasons, be that physical barriers, be that language issues, be that just traditionally not being able to access things for fear of it all going wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big takeaways I had when I was going over that guidance. The concept of accessibility is now much broader, and it's one colleague Fiona and I were discussing yesterday. It takes in that inclusive element as well. The sort of two have been brought onto the one element, and we're trying now to branch beyond the sort of the basic legislation of number of car parking spaces for disabled people, and make that quite a bit broader. Kevin and Aisling, if I could come on to yourselves, just in terms of that document, one of the elements which the pastoral guidance brings out is in terms of the difference between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK is legislation, and we obviously are not under the Equality Act, which Scotland, Wales, and England are under. We sort of work within the DDA. How is that sufficient in your thought? And then as a broader thing, which you can maybe come on to, how useful is something like this guidance for yourselves? Obviously, in the context yourselves also released guidance in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, obviously legislation's an issue. We don't have the Equality Act here. In the rest of the UK, they have one Equality Act that covers all the issues, if you like. We do have, obviously, the Disability Discrimination Act that still applies, and we have Section 75 of the 1998 Northern Ireland Act. So there is legislation there. There's enough legislation to frame things and to encourage and support people to do, to be more inclusive. So legislation, I think that's a technical issue. It probably would be better if we had an Equality Act, but I don't think that in itself is stopping any progress here. I think there's enough going on to actually encourage and support providers to be more inclusive. As Pippa quite rightly said there, I mean, the latest census now showed that the number of people with disability or long-term health condition in Northern Ireland is 24%. That's up from 21% 10 years ago. And that's because our population is getting older and people tend to acquire disabilities as they get older. So it's 1 in 4 of the population now, you are self-reporting that some difficulty. So it's a big section of the population that potentially can be excluded. And as Pippa said, potentially all of those people could be excluded, but our experience, particularly in the sports sector, is that the higher level, the higher your impairment, the level of your impairment, the more likely you are to be excluded. And that's across a whole range of sports and activities and whatever, we also know from our experience, though, that developing our own programs, that if you have an inclusive approach and you plan and you design and you consult, that almost everything has the potential to be inclusive. And we've people, as do the Mae Murray Foundation, for example, we work with lots of people at high levels of impairment in sports like bocce and wheelchair rugby, who you do have to make significant changes to include them, but it's quite possible. And the other issue, I suppose, you talk about legislation here, and that's important, but actually the biggest thing for us now, and I've been doing this for almost 30 years, as you know, is that we found that the expectation of disabled people has increased rapidly, quite rightly so. When I started years ago and buildings weren't accessible, and all the issues, I think the first 5 years of our existence was all about getting access to sports centres, for example. The society has moved on dramatically, quite rightly so. But the expectation of disabled people, quite rightly, has increased very, very significantly, and they expect to be included, quite rightly. So in the sports sector, and that does include outdoor recreation, you're still half as likely to participate in sport or recreation as a non-disabled person. Okay, and that's not because disabled people don't want the opportunity. It's because the opportunities don't exist. So, there's enough, there's legislation there, there's enough guidance there, there's organisations like us and the other people around the table today promoting the cause. It's just we need more organisations to do more. I think the outdoor recreation sector are probably a little bit behind the sports sector generally, where things have moved on. And I think that's maybe around, I don't really know why it is, but it's probably because they don't see disabled people, maybe, because I'm not really sure. I mean, that's why we produced our guidance. We released our guidance in 2021. It was because there was nothing around at that time. The guidance was quite dated. There was some good stuff done in the past, but it was quite dated. Since then, obviously, the Countryside for All guidance has been updated, which is great. But the reason we produced our guidance 2021 is we're being asked on a daily basis by people, how do we make our environment more inclusive? And it is an access guide. It's not an inclusion guide. It's about saying, here's technical things you can change to improve the situation. So that guidance there, and the Countryside for All guidance is there, but I don't think we have the same focus in the outdoor sector around inclusion. So, for example, in the sports sector, we would have an inclusive sport award for governing bodies. We would have inclusive sports facility award accreditation for sports facilities, and that's about a detailed process of planning, inclusive design, consulting with people, assessing technical standards, and then saying, yeah, this is pretty much inclusive. And you can't be like, it's either inclusive or it's not. You can't really have, almost inclusive or fully inclusive. We all fall into that language sometimes, but it's inclusive. And my interpretation of that is a facility, an environment has been thought through and adapted to be as inclusive as many people as physically possible.
Fantastic, Kevin. And that idea of designing in advance before, at the early stages, and then also retrofitting is going to be something that'll come up in a little while. Ashley, you were obviously involved in the development of that guidance as well, and just on what Kevin was saying there, the issue of accessibility in the outdoors was sort of brought to the fore during COVID. I mean, a lot of people, that was one of the big sort of inverted commas successes for some people during the pandemic, but it really laid bare the lack of access facilities for people with disabilities. Is that something you had found when you were putting that guidance together in 2021? I'm conscious it was just after the pandemic.
Definitely. I think that COVID was the driver behind the Accessible Outdoor Places Guide, because we were finding that people wanted to participate, people wanted to get out and about, and that expectation increased that everyone should have that opportunity to do so. So it very much was the driver behind getting some sort of technical guidance and design guidance out there, so that it could inform designers, it could inform site managers about how they could kind of start the process and make the outdoor environment better, and that in turn allows those opportunities to participate to increase.
Fantastic. As I say, we will get on to those barriers to making the outdoors more accessible very shortly. I've just two more questions around this, and then if anyone else would like to put questions in around the pastoral guidance, feel free to do so in the chat. But if I can go to Margaret Henry now from National Lottery Heritage Fund. Margaret, just out of curiosity, obviously when people are you're working with stakeholders and groups, how aware have you found that the awareness of guidance like this here has increased over the years, and how much of an emphasis and importance do yourselves place on the very broad topic of accessibility?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, I'll just say in terms of how important it is for the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the projects that we fund, I mean, the short answer is very important. We absolutely want to open up all forms of heritage, natural heritage included, to as many people as possible and remove those barriers that exist. We've recently launched a new strategy, Heritage 2033, and within that we now have 4 investment principles that will guide all of our funding over the next 10 years. And one of those principles is inclusion, access and participation. And that's as important as those other 3 investment principles that we have there. So that's kind of us in terms of what we do. In terms of the guidance, I would say it's a mixed economy. I would say that some organisations are aware, possibly those more resourced, maybe bigger organisations. Then as you move through to maybe some of the smaller voluntary-led groups that we would get applications from as well, they're often not sure where to start. and kind of don't know what they don't know, you know, and are coming to the thing with really good intent, but are a bit unsure, and even unsure sometimes how to broach the subject and what is the appropriate language to use, for example. So within the National Lottery Heritage Fund, I mean, certainly as you've said in your introduction, my job along with the engagement manager here is to help groups as they're preparing their applications. And we would have some good practice guidance on our own website, but we're not the experts. The experts are, you know, the people we have here today. So what we try to do within our guidance is signpost, whether that's me talking to people or whether people are going onto our website to have a look. So signpost the guidance to encourage people to go and look at the documents and the toolkits that have been produced and see how that helps. And again, I say it often does come down to capacity. You know, there's a lot in pulling a project together. There's a lot in putting an application in, never mind then delivering the project. So I think sometimes people are slightly put off, but we definitely are encouraging people very strongly to look at the support that's out there. And even sometimes just the simple things can make a massive difference. So, for example, one of the things I've seen with a number of projects now is just having all the relevant information on the website, so that you don't have to keep bringing up and keep asking if you have some sort of access need. Do you have this? Can I do that? Is there that? You know, just having that on the website so that just like anybody else, you can go on and plan your trip and plan your visit to your site without feeling you have to be different or you have to go out of your way to find out and to sort of drag information out of a site or an attraction before you visit. I've seen even things like literally having photographs of the signage in order to help you to get to somewhere. Now that helps me, never mind, you know, anybody else. So I think, you know, if we keep that attitude in mind about, you know, to Mae's point, it's nearly the majority we're talking about here now. We all have some access needs, whether it's like me and your sense of direction's not great, or, you know, whether it's something more involved and more kind of impactful on your daily life. So from our point of view, we're very much encouraging and signposting people to do what they can, to look at the access and to see it as a positive, because you're opening up your site, you're opening up your project to more people. That only has to be a good thing. And certainly from our point of view, that's what we want to see.
Fantastic, Margaret. And I suppose it's going back to that point that Kevin had made, that the outdoor recreation sector is behind, and we have to be honest about that and sort of embrace it and use that knowledge to drive us forward. And if people, again, one of the things that we want people to take away from today is that there are experts within Northern Ireland who will be able to help you and will be able to develop this here. So whether it's, we will obviously send an email out after this here with the contact details for Pippa, for the guys at Mae Murray Foundation, for Disability Sport and yourself. And we're really encouraging people to make use of that and reach out. Everybody's very friendly and everybody wants the same thing. So yeah, really to make use of that. I'm going to very quickly move now to our Outscapers. I'm going to sort of put you on the spot, Fiona and Claire, a little bit. Basically, obviously, the guidance that Pastoral produced is incredibly useful. So I just was curious how guidance like that, like the Pastoral document, how you as place shapers are using it on sort of a day-to-day basis, or how it has impacted yourselves and how you do that element of your job.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. Claire, I'll go first if that's okay with you. Yeah. I suppose it's an invaluable reference tool, Ethan, but it's one of a suite of tools and reference guidance documents that we would refer to when planning and designing our projects. So definitely since its launch and then subsequently attending the ORN conference there was back in June last year, it has widened our perspective. I think it's certainly influenced my thinking as a place shaper and designer of sites and trails, and taken several learnings, I think, from this guide that aren't necessarily very front and center, you know, and that like these standards, you might fall into the trap of thinking they're the gold standard, these are best practice, but they're not. You know, one of the things that come out of the conference was that these standards are the minimum, and that as designers and place shapers, land managers, we should be striving to always exceed them and always look for opportunities to remove those barriers, as we've said there, for everyone, you know, and the wide spectrum of abilities and you know, ages and perspectives there are. So I mean, it's certainly widened the lens for us, I think, as an organisation, to not just think about accessibility, but inclusivity, and accessibility as a component of that. And I think definitely there could be more done here to understand the difference. And I think in that sense, then for me, inclusivity is a mindset. You know, it's not just a tick box exercise. It's something that we need to work hard, that inclusivity becomes inherent in our thinking when we're planning and designing a project and in those early stages. And I think the last thing I probably want to leave with is my thoughts are that these technical standards, they are a comfort to have and a reassurance that, you know, in certain areas, we are meeting legal requirements for physical access, but in no way do they replace engagement and consultation with the user groups, and not just the user groups that currently use our sites and our places, but those that we want to see using them more. And I think basing designs and plans on the findings and conclusions and engagement with lived experience groups and people, so that we're making sure we're identifying what the exact barriers are for them and not just assuming we know that, and really working hard to remove those, so that they can enjoy the outdoors on an equal basis and on their own terms.
Fantastic. And again, another really challenging sort of mindset to not assume that because we have guidance that is, if we tick most of the boxes in that guidance, we've done a good job, but rather we're striving to take this as a minimum, and to go well beyond that. It's a challenging concept, but it's a very important one if we want to, if we are being honest with the fact that we want to improve things, and that's the mindset we need to go with. Okay, Claire, I'm very sorry. I'm going to have to temporarily gloss over you for a second, just because I'm conscious of our timing. We are rapidly shooting on here, and I want to get to as many of the queries that were sent in by people in advance. So for this element of things, anyone from the our delegates can again message into the chat or raise your hand, and we'll come to you. We have about 30 to 40 questions that have been sent to us by people in advance. So we are more than likely not going to get through them all, but we'll try and get through. Some of them are overlap, so we'll get through as many as we can. And I suppose it would be a good place to start with, if I just pull them up here. Yes, and I can't remember who has touched on this already, but the concept of language, I think it was yourself, Margaret, that somebody had written in to say the language used in accessibility and inclusion, there needs to be consistency. And there were maybe 3 or 4 other people who mentioned about an updated list of terminology. And it's something I certainly struggled with whenever I was sort of getting into the research of this. I'll be honest, I didn't know the right terminology for certain things and certain groups of people. And I think for some people that can be quite scary, because there's such fear of offending people. But Pippa, I'll maybe come to you first on this topic. What is the best way if you don't know what should you do around terminology and the language that people should be using?
Always ask. Disabled people would far rather you ask them than we guessed or thought we were saying something politically correct. And there's Disability Support NI, there's us, we can all answer texts, emails, and we'll keep you as right as we can, you know. But the best thing to do is ask, especially if somebody comes to you with perhaps an access or inclusion inquiry themselves, and it's just to ask them how they would like to be referred to, or you know what needs they have, and if you don't know, say you don't know and find out. You know, people don't mind if you, rather than make something up, it's far better just to say, oh, I'm not sure, I'll go and find out and I'll come back to you, and then come to us and we'll steer you right. And that's Kevin, the broad we, not just Mae Murray, the broad we of all of us here today.
Kevin, you've been in the sector for 30 years. I imagine the terminology has evolved. How do you personally sort of keep up with it? I imagine it's just that outreach and conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of impairment-specific groups who represent the individuals with that particular disability or impairment, and you know, we make sure we keep up to date with what people find acceptable and what they find offensive. But language, of course, has changed historically, changes culturally. I mean, how we describe people with disabilities or different impairments is different than in the States, for example. And some of the words they use, I mean, the word handicapped, for example, up until recently, is still widely used in America. Most disabled people here, and I say most disabled people because everyone's different, some don't care or whatever. But basically, there's a lot of guidance out there in the language, and once once you look at the guidance, it's pretty straightforward. It's all about putting the person first and using words that people find acceptable. The other issue, I think, is there's confusion around the terms inclusion and access and equality. And the problem is people use those terms interchangeably, and that's fine. But once you get into the technical side of it, you need to be careful. I suppose one of the things I thought today, I was just thinking about, sorry, before today's seminar was, I think there's a lack of training out there around disability and the outdoors. So we work with most of the governing bodies in Northern Ireland. So most of their key staff, most of their clubs will have gone through disability, what we call disability inclusion training, which is which includes things like language and terminology and how you adapt things for disabled people. And it's probably there's probably a scope to do more of that around the outdoor sector. Certainly we've done bespoke sessions with staff at Tullymore, etc., and so on over the years, and with specific clubs who work in an outdoor environment. But it probably should be something that becomes more mainstream, if you like. That people go along and they just pick up on the language to use. But go back to Pippa's point, the bottom line is most individual disabled people will be okay if you ask them, just ask an individual, and most will be reasonable. Not all, most, like all of us, but there's plenty of guidance out there. But I think in the 30, you said historically 30 years now, we do have the Disability Discrimination Act. Most public facilities are accessible now. Language has improved, compared when we started 30 years ago. I mean, the language used to describe disabled people 30 years was generally negative, was negative language. That has changed. Society has changed. Things have improved. But I think it is important to get it right.
As I say, it's great to get that experience. It's probably reassuring for people as well to hear that sometimes yourselves don't know, and it is a case of just reaching out to people. Claire, your project on changing places toilets, what was there an element of that for you, a challenge of that for you around the language that was used, and I guess as a practical example, what did you do in that situation?
Being very, very honest, the changing places toilets project that I worked on was a real learning experience for me, and I got an awful lot out of that personally, and I think we organisationally got a lot out of that from working very closely with Mae Murray, for example. Alex gave me a lot of her time, and was my teacher and my guide throughout that project. It was amazing, and that a lot of that was around the use of language, what I should and shouldn't be saying. But ultimately, I suppose what I've taken away from it is just be fearless. Don't let not knowing what to say, or I'm going to say the wrong thing, hold you back from trying. We're all on the same page here. We're all trying to make good progress. So don't let saying the wrong thing hold you back, but be willing to learn from that. And I suppose referring to, you've brought it up a few times now, Kevin, this difference between calling something inclusive versus using the term accessibility. They're two completely different things. And I think our organisation has taken that away from, even just the last 3 or 4 years, how we use those terms. We should never be using them interchangeably. You say the word accessible to who? Your granny, someone in a power chair. It's different things to different people. And so yeah, the Changing Places Toilets project, it was more than changing places toilets. It was about designing the outdoors to be a whole inclusive experience, of which Changing Places Toilets is only one part. There's no point in installing a Changing Places toilet at the top of a mountain if you can't get to it. Nor is there an expectation from people with lived experience that we should be doing that. So there were a lot of learnings from that specific project that went way beyond just changing places toilets.
Yeah, I guess
just on anything, if we just use
sorry,
an example, I wish I had £1 for every accessible fishing stand in Northern Ireland. That is totally inaccessible. You know, the stand is accessible; it was built to a technical standard, but there's no way anyone's going to get near it.
Yeah, and I know this is possibly sounding repetitive, but again, it's going back and asking, like as Claire said there, Mae Murray Foundation were the experts there that were able to guide, and we'll be able to do the same for anyone in this call that is struggling with any element of language. We'll move on to the next question, because again, this is another one that came up quite often in different variations, and it was around the concept of play. So specifically, how to properly handle play equipment on sites, how to make accessible play more auspicious. It's quite a broad thing, because as was touched on in that ORN webinar, play can mean different things to different people, and it also incorporates not just children but adults. It should be like it's another small element that should maybe be considered. So I'll maybe go back to I'll maybe go to Aisling for this, just in terms of Aisling, with your consultancy. I imagine something you've come across from time to time. Have you any thoughts on sort of what makes a successful accessible play?
Yeah, well, whenever we were developing the guide, we had a lot of conversations around, what should an accessible or inclusive play area be. And it's not just about the equipment. But having said that, if you have a play area, you must have pieces in there that enable disabled children to participate. And I think there's a big conversation around the design of the area, because integrating those pieces can mean that it doesn't feel like it's separate. It doesn't feel like it's sterile. There's a designated area for disabled children to play in. It's about integration. It's about creating the opportunities for social play, supportive play. So if you have pieces that are inclusive, they allow for siblings to accompany disabled children. They allow parents, if necessary, to offer support. But you could have a nest swing, for example, just taking one example, a nest swing integrated in an area where there are other swings, and therefore you're providing options. You're not providing separate provisions, you're providing options for play. And that in turn allows siblings to accompany, to lie beside, to support. It's the same with rockers or roundabouts. It means everyone can play, and everyone can avail of sensory items in there. It's about learning, it's about developing, and it's not about having that separate area. And the point you made about intergenerational play is very important. If you have equipment in there, and not just the equipment that you automatically think about, but think about the area and how you can use the natural landscape to create opportunity for play, for availing, for the senses, to stimulating the senses, sound. It doesn't always have to be an off-the-shelf piece of equipment that enables that to happen. It can be natural play. But if you are selecting it, you could select a wide slide, which means and the slide is accessed by a mound as opposed to a set of steps. That all creates integration. And thinking again about, if you have facilities like accessible parking and accessible toilets close by, that means that if you have children who are accompanied by the grandparents, that will assist. You're allowing for supervision, whilst if you've rest seats, for example, you're helping older people or people with hidden disabilities who might be accompanying children to take part. You could have an outdoor fitness area beside the play area, and that allows intergenerational play. But a lot of the pieces as well can enable not just children, but young adults and older adults to also play. And it's important not to segregate in any way. And it is achievable, but it's about having the discussion. And I think going back to the accessibility and inclusivity conversation, accessibility can be the extent to which an environment is available, But inclusivity can mean there's a methodology approach where you have that engagement, you're considering all of the groups, and you're making sure that if the environment is accessible, the experience can also then happen. So it's very important, and the two are interchangeable, as Kevin said, and they do go hand in hand very much so.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Ashton, thank you so much. And Pippa and Fiona, I know obviously yourselves both have a wealth of experience. Mae Murray Foundation obviously goes back years in terms of the variety of play elements. Is there anything else you would like to add to that, Pippa?
Yeah, at Storm at the beginning of March, so there'll be a launch of the Adapt My Play guide. So we did an inclusive beach adapt framework, and the adapts for access, dignity, all ability, participation and transformation. And for all the lessons that we learn over the journeys that we take through designing and implementing projects, we produce a guide so that everybody else can do the same. So you're not having to do the same learnings and hit the same barriers necessarily that we did. So, and you know, we consider everything then for disabled parents, for disabled children, for people with additional needs, for whatever level. It comes from all the angles for how we can cover that, so that hopefully it becomes the standard whenever there's a new play park being put in place or bought by a council or designed. It's like when they dropped the light switches in houses and became a new regulation. It was step one of how do we make everything better for anybody rather than just for the few. So, you know, when new public buildings are built, there's changing places, toilets in them now. So these are becoming the standards. So the more that organisations like us and the others produce solid evidence, member-led guides that work, then the better change we can make. And yes, we're really happy to help anybody with any questions, even if it's just, you know, we've got a piece of equipment that needs replaced, help us. We're more than happy to share our love for making the world inclusive.
And you said that guidance is coming out in March, Pippa,
Yeah,
is that right?
It's the first week in March will be a Storm. Yeah. So,
Okay, fantastic. We'll definitely keep an eye out for that there.
yeah.
You're on mute, Ethan.
Always once every webinar it happens. No, I was just saying, apologies, that Pippa will obviously keep an eye out for that there in March, and look forward to seeing what comes from it. And again, signposting people to yourselves and the other experts in this. I was saying we have a couple of comments in the chat, and we will get to them in a moment. And I'm also conscious just like we have that question. I think came from someone in council, but with groups like Playboard NI and others here today, they'll hopefully have derived a lot of benefit from that there topic. We had the next topic I was going to move to was budgetary constraints, and I presume that's an issue in terms of both capital possibly, and more often than not it's longer term resource, the capital initially to reach that concept from the pastoral guidance of the least restrictive access, so doing as much as we can, but then the longer term resource issue, which is one that different groups had brought up as well. So Margaret, I'll maybe come to yourself firstly. You mentioned when you were talking earlier that one of your core staples is considering accessibility. How much scope is there within that around the initial project versus resource, and how would you advise people to approach that?
Yes, I mean, one of the other investment principles actually is around organizational sustainability. So we recognize that that's a challenge. It is one thing to do a project, and that can be hard enough, but it is another thing entirely to then be able to sustain the move forward that you've made, or the opening up of the heritage that you've achieved. So we absolutely recognize that, and we do try to help where we can, say as a project funder. So I mean, I think one of the things about our projects is, you can take up to 5 years to complete a project. With us, we're not bound in the way that some other public funding is by sort of financial year constraints. So that can give people a chance to kind of build up the capacity within their own organisation to be able to maintain what they've set out to do in terms of whether, access that inclusion piece as well. And I suppose we're very supportive of projects where organisations want to make a change in what voices they actually have within their organization. So whether that's at a board level, working to bring in different voices around the board table, or whether that's within the workforce as well, or indeed within volunteers. So things like that will have a longer term impact and can be sustained within the overall running of an organization or group are things we are very much open to supporting. And I think we're also open to supporting that learning bit. If a project, an organization, as part of the project that they're doing, says, look, we are absolutely on a learning journey here. So, we want to include fees to have some training, to work with the organizations and the experts, some of whom are here today, then we will absolutely cover that so that learning is embedded within an organization, that they can take that forward into whatever they're doing in the future, and hopefully that is more sustainable. But we are conscious, of the challenge around sustaining things beyond projects, and without, being a core funder, because we're not, we do try to help where possible, and we do try to kind of talk to people about that as they're preparing their applications with us.
Fantastic, Margaret. That was a really a conclusive answer to that question. So I'm going to move on again, just conscious of the time. Kevin, I'll go to you for this one. It's about, again, this was one that came up maybe 4 or 5 times from people, how to make space inviting, and what the phrasing that was used was not obvious. And then a similar point was on making outdoor spaces accessible, but not making them sterile or clinical. And I guess Aisling and Pippa have both touched on this a bit, but whenever people are designing, they obviously want to make it feel part of the same site that they're working on. So what advice would you give people that are maybe trying to consider that? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Kevin. Happens us all.
I suppose the general point is, it doesn't necessarily have to be sterile and ugly. To adapt an area or a facility, can be done in a very sensitive way and still achieving the same level of accessibility. And Ashton will be able to give you lots of examples of that. And even if you look in the built environment, there's some very historic buildings, which in the early days people said, oh no, we can't adapt that building, it'll ruin the building, it'll change its aesthetics. If you look at somewhere like Stormont or City Hall, they've done quite sensitive things to make them accessible. So the same, I think, applies to the outdoor environment. And the other thing is there's always a level of balance. And no disabled person, in my experience, wants to build a tarmac path up the side of an unspoiled area. Nobody wants that. There is a level of balance and common sense. But I think Aisling would be a bit better at actually explaining some of the technical ways you can actually make something aesthetically pleasing but still accessible.
Yeah, and again, as Kevin said, there may be an expectation that disabled people expect that tarmac path up the side of Divis Mountain or whatever, but that isn't the case. Disabled people want to enjoy the same experience in the same way as everyone else does. And you can think about ways to do it in a sensitive way. So whether it's through the materials that are used, whether it's through color, you can get certain surfaces that by applying a color, it automatically looks more natural. So you can think about ways to assessing the site is so important, and getting input into what can we actually do here to make things better. Again, going back to, I suppose, just pulling up another example, the all-out trekking program that Disability Sport and I run at Gosford Forest Park in Armagh, Kevin, whenever the assessment of the site was done, in order to get the all-terrain vehicles around the trails, they would have come up against some rock gates, so 2 large sort of boulders in the pathway, which are completely natural in terms of the aesthetic, but they didn't allow accessibility for the vehicles. So all they had to do was just move them to widen the trail, without ruining the aesthetic that was already there. You can simply, if you had a couple of steps, for example, that automatically creates a barrier. But think about it, or if you had a tree obstructing a pathway, You're not going to cut down the tree, but there might be a way to sensitively bypass it. So you're integrating, you could bypass the steps. So you're integrating rather than destroying what is already there, and doing it in the best way as possible you can, but also being sensitive. But again, promoting what the environment is very important pre-visit. So you have to let people know what to expect, and don't be fearful about doing that. Site managers shouldn't be afraid to say, this is what I have, in case they think it highlights what they don't have. Disabled people like to know what to expect, and it informs choices and informs their visit. So even thinking about doing a photo trail, so that people can view the trail, can view. You can highlight in the pre-visit. We've covered this in the guide. I think it's in section 3, which is wayfinding signs and information, the importance of pre-visit information and making sure you let people know what to expect, and what if there are any barriers that pre-exist, and you planning ahead to omit those barriers. So for example, if you were out in a site and at the minute there's a stile there, not everyone is going to be able to complete a trail with a stile on it, but you can plan, let them know that it's there, but you can plan then to replace it with something better.
Yeah, it goes back to the concept of the access chain. So making sure that people know when they make the decision that they want to go, when they make the journey there, the actual experience when they're there, and then the conclusion of the journey.
But there are things that can be done, Ethan, to improve without having to necessarily have a detrimental impact on the surroundings.
And Ethan, if I can just add to that, I do think, some of this comes from the fact there's lots of examples of where things have been done very poorly. They've been made accessible, but they're ugly and they're not very pleasing to the eye. And I do think, and getting back to my original point, I do think the outdoor sector, there needs to be more guidance around these issues and more examples. When we produced our Accessible Outdoor Places Guide, one of the issues we had, obviously we're a Northern Ireland-based organisation, we want to use local examples of things. It was very difficult finding good examples of accessible design in the outdoor environment done well. So I do think, you described us as experts earlier, which is very nice, but we're not experts. We're learning all the time. And, our guide came out in 21. It almost needs updated already. There's so many more examples of things that have been done well. And I do think that's something that Outscape, have to have a key role in. You guys are the experts, Fiona and Claire and so on. You are actually the real experts, and it should be about coming up with examples and testing things with the disability organisations, so that there are really good examples. But even in a built environment in Northern Ireland, there's some excellent facilities where we've adapted in a very thoughtful way, and there's others are crude and ugly. It doesn't need to be like that.
I think that the one description of what an expert is getting something wrong enough to know that roughly what not to do, and then to go from there. And as I say, we're very, very lucky, and you're very kind, Kevin, with your words. Likewise, there are so many organisations around Northern Ireland, like Mae Murray and yourselves, that are doing phenomenal work. And again, just to reiterate, that we want people to go to use that resource and knowledge that's there, because it's a bit of a cop-out just to say, oh well, if I go to a certain group, they'll want us to, for example, tarmac everything, whereas in actual fact they probably don't. They want the outdoors to stay as it is as much as possible and enjoy it the same way everyone else does. We're going to answer one more question, and I'm going to throw it very quickly to you, Pippa, and I'm going to put you under pressure to answer it quite quickly. It comes from, I think, Nikki Elliott from Walk It Off NI. It's on the concept of judging accessibility of trails and demonstrating this clearly for customers. So I guess it goes back a little bit to what Ashley was saying there. What, in your experience, is the best way of judging that accessibility, and then actually showcasing it to people that use it? And then we will tie off with the questions that people put in the chat here.
Yeah, well, we've certainly discovered with our members is that we've got a big bunch of members who are really willing to be guinea pigs. So, for example, when last year, we got a new beach wheelchair, which is all terrain, but it's manual use. It was our first manual use. So who better to try that than a wheelchair basketball player who really doesn't mind falling out of chairs, because it's kind of what they like to do. So they were brilliant to test them up and down dunes, into the water, around and about, so we know. So we have a core group of members who want other people to experience what they want to experience. So walking along a mountain trail may not be their cup of tea, but they'd be more than happy to test it out, let you know what works, what doesn't work. so that the people who do enjoy that sort of thing can take part in it. So again, it's back to the very beginning of what we said. It's asking the people who want to use it. I think Fiona made the point earlier, you've got user groups, but you've also got people who you want to be user groups. And we did a fundraiser in last Christmas to start Port Stewart as an inclusive beach. And the point, people said the reason they didn't realise there wasn't wheelchairs on the beach, they hadn't seen them, was they didn't realise they couldn't get on the beach. So it's very similar. You made the point at the beginning about perhaps the reason why people aren't out there is because they can't get there. So once they start seeing people who can get there, and we publish it, and you just use your traditional social media channels, your newspapers, your news items. The biggest hit we got this year was when Saul went on Countryfile, and he used one of our all-terrain chairs and abseiled down a mountain up the north coast. We've never had a bigger response than getting something like that. And a man actually drove over from England with a wheelchair that his wife never got to use because she died, to gift it to us because he'd seen it. So the impact of having a good news story of somebody enjoying themselves in terrible weather in the outdoors actually is more valuable than a pretty picture of a nice car park with a changing places toilet and the start of a route. You know, it's practical user stories are great.
Yeah, and that success breeds success, and it's up to everyone in the sector, and very much including ourselves, to try and drive that success forward. That relates a wee bit to Taz's question. Fiona, maybe did you have a wee look at Taz had asked, and it sort of is along the same lines about exploring the ease of use for paths?
Yes, thanks, Ethan. I did have a wee read of that. Yeah, I think you know, our go-to would be the Paths for All guidance, path grading for managers there, and it provides some really good guidance, as well as the outdoor accessibility guidance. But I think the one thing that we hear over and over again is, you know, like, don't take the decision away from us. You know, we will decide whether a trail is for us or not. So again, it goes back to the providing sufficient and appropriate information pre-site visit and on the site, so that people can make the decision for themselves based on, you know, the knowledge of their own competencies and abilities there. So I suppose from an Outscape point of view, those would be the two key guidance pieces that we would use. And then, as I say, the information around thinking about how to get that out there around the access chain.
Fantastic. Claire, I see you've given a thumbs up from Dr. Jonathan McCrae, who had made the point, is just saying that suggesting greater involvement of physiotherapists and occupational therapists, who are clinicians that can assess people clinically, understand their impairments, which are broadly in the categories of physical, cognitive, behavioral, and emotional. And finally, the descriptor of disability arises from the interaction between the person with an impairment and the environment and attitudes in society, which is a great point to almost end on.
Can I chip in one wee bit, Ethan, there on your OTs and stuff? Yeah,
absolutely.
We did a wee trial this year. We brought the first year OTs up to Portrush this year. So the brand new, fresh out of the box, to show them what inclusive activities look like on a beach and let them try all equipment and stuff. Because what our members say is that they're getting a very clinical reaction from OTs when they're at their community level of what they're getting. So we've decided to try and tackle it from the inside out, as it were. So, and that would be a great idea for any of you who are setting up anything new, is just get them in them first year, show them what real life looks like in an inclusive environment. And that was something we're definitely going to continue. And we do use OTs ourselves when we're lending out equipment, starting new equipment, so that we can advise our members. And we work with the wheelchair service and stuff so that people are confident in using it.
Yeah, and the value that must bring to the OTs as an experience is incalculable. That's such a phenomenal scheme.
So yeah, humanising everything, isn't it? And showing potential rather than limitation is really important.
Just to give Johnny his credit there, because he's been really instrumental in pulling together various strands to create inclusive experiences around. It's more sport, but it's outdoor recreation as well. So sorry, I'm speaking for you, Johnny, but Johnny is a physio and he's pulled us to get us involved in the recent Irish Society of Chartered Physiotherapists conferences. He pulled in Triathlon Ireland to that as well. And so he's trying to combine the outdoor space, the place, with the programme or the resource, the triathlon event, with the needs of the people who want to participate in these events. And so Johnny's getting people onto adapted bicycles and adapted wheelchairs so that they can fully participate. So he's outside, he's trying to get people to look outside that very clinical setting and, you know, look at the sort of rehabilitation setting outside of a medical hospital. You know,
Environment.
you're out in society doing what you should be doing,
Yep.
and that's part of your recovery. So
final question that we have here from Maya, and it's around it's an Outscape issue, so I'm happy to try and bat this one, and then we could talk about this all day, folks, and I'm really grateful that usually when you hit the hour mark, the number of people attending drops to about 3, so it's indicative of the level of interest, so we really appreciate it. Maya had asked about the Outscape have plans to increase the info about accessibility on outmoreni.com to help those searching for information to plan visits, and I think that's something we really need to challenge ourselves on, that we have all of these trails and sites across Northern Ireland, and if we're serious about wanting to be accessible and to really put the level of importance in that it deserves, and then the short answer is yes. We hope to just always be improving, I suppose, same as everyone else. I think that is going to have to be time up. As I say, we could talk about this all day, and an hour is nowhere near enough. But as I said, what we want today is to get a couple of points that people maybe have been stuck on, but more importantly, to know that there's the experts in the field here who you can go to for advice. We have in the chat link there, Kerry has kindly put it in, a form. It would be really appreciated if you could leave your feedback on that form, just to tell us what we did well, what we could improve on, because that really helps us sort of to plan further training days for these events. For anyone that's interested, the Outscape conference will be taking place on Thursday, the 7th of March, and general sale of tickets will go on from Monday. So keep an eye in your inboxes for that. Any questions about today can be emailed to myself, Ethan at out-scape.com. And I just want to finish off by saying thank you so much to Pippa and to Margaret, to Kevin and Aisling and Fiona and Claire. I got so much out of today, and we really appreciate giving up your time for that. So hopefully we will speak to you all again very soon, and have a lovely day. As I say, an email will be sent around with the recording, and any questions, just let us know. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks, Ethan.
You.